You tend to blame yourself. If I were stronger, if I were smarter, if I were tougher, if I were making more money. But it has nothing to do with that. It's chemistry.
I'm Lily Cornell Silver, and welcome to Mind Wide Open, my mental health focused interview series. Today, I am talking to comedian Gary Gulman, who has an incredible HBO special called The Great Depresh, all about his struggles with severe depression. Today, he and I are talking about his experiences being hospitalized for depression, the importance of talking about your own mental health, and how he has infused that into comedy. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoy. Hi, Gary. Thank you so much for being here. I'm sure everyone that you've ever talked to has said this to you, but The Great Depresh, incredible. And your ability to talk about mental health in a forum that is so real and doesn't undermine any of the honesty of the pain you've experienced, but still allows others to relate to it is like so admirable and something that I hope to achieve one day. So amazing. So thank you.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is when I was your age, I was suffering from depression, and I told no one. I used to sneak into my therapist's office at the college. And so the good thing is that you are coming of age at a time when people are talking about it in full voice, not whispering about it or sharing secrets about it or feeling hopeless about it. So I say this a lot. There's never been a better time to be mentally ill.
No, honestly, that's super true. And I talked about this in an interview I did with some of my friends that I grew up with. And something that we talked about was like in third grade, second grade, our parents had us all in therapy and none of us told each other. Like we were all telling our therapists as kids, like, none of my friends are in therapy. Like, I'm weird, I'm crazy. And now that we're older and we've talked about it, like we found out that we were all in therapy. Like some of us even had the same therapist. But like, you're so right that that's something that my friends and I talk about. And
it's really fantastic. And I mean, there were so many reasons why I couldn't have done it even 5 years ago. One of them was just, I wasn't well. Mm-hmm. But the other thing was that I didn't really have an audience that I felt would go along with me in this sort of departure from what I usually do, because my act was rather tame with respect to the darkness of it. I didn't get very dark, and I don't mean to say that the depression I got very dark, but the subject tends to be something that people feel uncomfortable around. So I was very fortunate. I had that audience that was so generous with their hearts and with their time and were patient with me while I was practicing it and trying things out. And I couldn't have done it without them, honestly.
Right. And something that I've experienced in doing this series is kind of the realization of how much people want to talk about it. Like people are so dehydrated for these conversations. So I'm glad you experienced the same thing, that it's something that people really are like, wanting to talk about. They want to hear other people's stories. They want to hear your story. They want to share their story with you. So I think that's good news.
And I think that's something you'll notice over and over again, is that this thing you were so worried people would judge you on or dismiss you or be concerned with working with you. It's just the opposite. It allows them to share their stories and their pain, and it brings you closer with them. I'll give you an example. A man during the show started fumbling around and talking to people around him, and he said, "What is this for you, therapy?" And the rest of the audience were so alarmed by that and were so thrown by that they cheered me when he left. I told him, I said, well, the name of the show is The Great Depresh, and I guess that was confusing to you, but I mean, it was worth him doing that just because the people showed me how much they cared for me, and it was really nice. So I think all the things that I feared about letting my manager and other people I worked with know about these things, and I didn't say all of it at once. I told them I was depressed, and then later on I told them that I was checking into the hospital, and then even later than that, I told him what kind of treatment I had, which was, I thought people would be horrified when I told them that I had electroconvulsive therapy. And it turns out they didn't bat an eye, and they thought it was interesting, and just they thought it was something that people would get some use from hearing about somebody else, especially other people who've done it and didn't
Probably
feel they could share it.
Yeah,
yes,
exactly.
and it's so helpful.
So would you say that the answer to him about, is this show like therapy for you? Do you think, because I'm generally like that, it seems like the answer might be yes. Like, yes. Yeah, it is a form of therapy.
Yeah, it is therapy. And it was, especially at the beginning when I first started just telling a few stories at very small venues, maybe less than 30 people in the audience. And I found that getting out of the house and being around other comedians and then having this sort of adrenaline flow when you get on stage, that was immensely therapeutic. There was a time when going up and doing the shows was very painful, and it wasn't helping. It wasn't beneficial, and one of the reasons was that my performance would dictate my mood. So that if I had a bad show, I couldn't get out of bed the next day. And
that sounds very familiar. Growing up in a music environment, that sounds very familiar.
Yes. And that is for somebody who works every night. It's like there's a referendum on your worth every night. And that is unhealthy, and it's not safe for me. So I just happened to be reading an article about this author that I really liked, and it was his notebook. And in the notebook, he had taped a quote, and I could barely make out the quote, but it was this: "Ever tried, ever failed, no matter. Try again, fail better." And fail better became sort of my motto, my mantra, because it was miraculous, because it freed me from all the pressure and the fear of, okay, if it goes well, I'll feel good about myself, and if it doesn't, I'll be inconsolable. And once I was able to deal with that, and it's a lesson that I should have learned as a child, but I don't know how I didn't figure out that it was okay to fail, and crucial to growing as a person and as an artist.
I think being in the public eye is a different ball game in that, like, the failure feels like it has a higher stake, maybe.
Yeah, it was hard enough just to talk about this stuff without also having to be perfect about it and super funny every time. Right. So I once I was able to give myself that permission, it wasn't smooth sailing as far as I wrote everything in a day. It was just that every show wasn't. There were stakes. I wanted to do well, but the stakes weren't my life and my happiness. It was, and I still get bummed out if I have a bad show, but I also can look at it as something that was actually moving me forward.
Definitely. Yeah. And fail is a strong word.
right.
Fail is a strong word. I think we take the word failure too lightly.
That's a great point. And maybe I use it so frequently because I've repurposed it for meaning taking a risk and then not nailing it. Yeah.
People that I've talked to, it's kind of gotten to a point where, especially for our generation and the generation above me, it's like we either continue the stigma and don't talk about it and literally like die or go crazy, or we talk about it. Like the options have become limited. Like, okay, we need to talk about this. This needs to be talked about.
Yeah, not talking about it didn't work at all.
Right.
And
We learned by example, right?
yeah. And I was 19 when I first went to a therapist, and once I had a name for it and I understood it, it didn't wipe out all the blame. And that's some of the worst parts about this type of thing, is that you tend to blame yourself. If I were stronger, if I were smarter, if I were tougher, if I were making more money, but it has nothing to do with that. It's chemistry. And I remember I used to walk to my therapist, and there was a huge, like, it was just painted on a building. It was an advertisement. It wasn't a billboard. It was literally painted on a building. And it said that mental illness is not a character flaw. And I would read it every day, and I would think to myself, well, it is in my case. If I were stronger, and if I were tougher, I could fight my way through this. And now on the other side of that, as somebody who's in his right mind, I can say, no, that's exactly right. It's not a character flaw. It's so sad that the very thing we need to get out of it is the thing that's attacking us and telling us we can't. It's
right.
It's crazy.
Right. And something that you've talked about is that the feeling that, like, the real version of you and then the version of you that others perceive, there's such a gap between those two things. And for me, in my struggles with grief and anxiety and with my own depression, that has been kind of the major cause of isolation for me, or the feeling of isolation, that, you know, people see me as very, like, happy and positive and bubbly. And I struggled greatly with trying to convey, like, this other side of me, that I'm kind of the only one that knows what that's like. So I'm curious to hear your experiences with that, and if that caused a sense of isolation for you.
When people think you have a perfect life and you tell them that your life is not perfect, I think not that they're glad, they're just to know that you're not perfect and that you have your struggles makes you more human. And I think that's where a connection is strengthened there. And there will be people who say, listen, I don't want to hear complaints from somebody who is doing better than me, or I just can't handle it. And that's fine. I mean, I've had that too. And it's sad, and it's unfortunate, but for the most part, I mean, with only a few exceptions, people are very happy to help, and it strengthens the relationship. So I'm not sure if I answered your question.
No, absolutely. I think that's something that I talk about a lot in this series, is, you know, mental health being kind of a unifying thing, in the sense that everyone experiences it at some point. And even if you're, you know, someone who doesn't struggle with things, you know, where it's at the kind of the forefront of your being, in the forefront of your life, you know, somebody, you know, who has, and I think that that's so important. And that's where so much of the stigma needs to be shed, is around the fact that, like, we feel like we can't talk about it with other people, or even, like, view it as complaining. I
had the worst depressive episode of my life from 2015 till near the end of 2017. And it was reasonable that I would be hospitalized. Right. There were several other depressive episodes that I had in my life where it didn't get to that level, where at no point would I say I need to be in the hospital. I need to have some serious treatment, and I can't take care of myself. But it wasn't a fun time. I was depressed. It was just a low grade, and everything I was doing was very difficult. The exercising that was supposed to make me feel better was so difficult. The just
and, like,
getting
the
out
last thing you want to do, the absolute last thing. Yeah.
Yes. And even just keeping up with my wife, who's I think she's 5'11", I'm 6'6", so she's about 7 inches shorter than me. Keeping up with her walking was difficult. Like, there are physical components to depression that people either don't mention because they feel so lousy, or they think are just them, but they're a part of the chemistry. It slows down your thinking, it slows down your walking. And I think that people, the thing that I am concerned a little bit about is that people will think that they can't share their their tough times with me because it doesn't rise to the level of checking yourself into a hospital. I want them to be able to say, I'm having a really hard time getting out of bed. I'm having a really hard time enjoying something. I mean, this is something that people don't even bother complaining about, but these things that I used to enjoy are no longer bringing me any pleasure and fun. And that's what life is those things that bring you enjoyment, that you look forward to. And if those things aren't working, then it's something that needs to be addressed. We get used to this feeling where we think just not wanting to quit my life and stay in bed all day is good enough. And I don't want to push for more, and I don't want to upset the apple cart. How does upset the apple cart expression still work today? People, it has no meaning at all. There's no apple cart that people are concerned about. Apple it's seldom just a cart full of apples, but anyhow, it's whoever made the expression is really doing some overtime. But the point is that you're satisfied with a very unsatisfactory situation just because you know it could be much worse, or it has gotten worse, and you settle, and it's sad. I feel bad. I want people to thrive.
Definitely. And that's conversations I've had with friends many, many times is, especially if I'm in a period of struggling and whoever I'm talking to is as well, that idea of like, how are you feeling? Like, what's going on? And they say, I don't want to die. So like, it's a really good day. Like, when did the bar get that low? When did when did we decide that that's like, okay, it's okay for me to be surviving in that way. And that I don't need, or that I don't deserve to like do something to make my life feel better and make me want to live my life in a fuller way.
Upset the apple cart is what I'm saying. You got to get out there and upset apple carts.
You need to make t-shirts with that on it. We need to upset the apple cart. Something else that I was super curious to hear from you about is like in interpersonal relationships, like you mentioned your wife, and I think a common theme for people that struggle with mental health and being in relationships is feeling like they're a burden, and that's something I've absolutely experienced. Is like, how do I take care of myself when I'm barely able to do that and still like have the energy to be pleasant to be in a relationship with, And so that's something I'm curious if you've experienced that.
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked about this, because I always try to get across what a team effort it was for me to get better. And how my wife Sade, she went, not the Sade, by the way.
I was gonna say, dang.
right. I it's a Sade. So but I can't stress enough how helpful it was to have somebody who was in it with me. Not to say that it's somebody who's not in it is not worth being with. It's not for everybody, but I think it really helped my cause along to have somebody who went to every psychiatry appointment with me and who did reading on the side to figure out if there were new studies. She would bring up these new studies with the doctor, and that was another case where the doctor wasn't arrogant and said, "How dare you question I'm a doctor. What do you think that diploma means up there?" And he would say that is a promising area and we can look into that, or he would say that's actually not something that would be beneficial for Gary at this point. And so he never made her feel uncomfortably. He took it in such a humble manner, and she did really good research. She actually. And I think the statute of limitations hopefully will have run out on this, but she grew mushrooms, psilocybin mushrooms in our apartment because she had read a study that is actually incredibly promising and has really done great things for people about the effects of microdosing mushrooms, the psilocybin, I think it is, although I don't know mushrooms. I was always afraid that if I took mushrooms, I would have a trip that I never came back from. So I was very careful about that. So
I get anxiety taking melatonin. So I can't do anything. I can't do anything.
But what I was going to say that it's important you don't have to, but when you get into a new relationship and you think it's going somewhere, I always told the people I have a history of severe depression and it gets dark. And if you want to bail now, I would completely understand. So she kind of knew that I had this propensity, but 6 months later, this started, and she stuck with me, and I'm grateful, because I like you said, there was part of me that felt like I was a burden, and I would have completely understood if she left me, because nobody signs up for what I was going through, and I'm not sure I would have been as strong as she was. I mean, it was valiant.
Yeah. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And I think there's so much to be said about having that, like, as a kind of prerequisite conversation, because there are people who, I mean, I'm very young, but like I've been with someone who really doesn't understand mental health and that's not, part of what they could like conceive as being part of a relationship. And I've been with someone who's like, like, I totally know what that is. And to have that understanding and to have that willingness to go the extra mile to really try to understand it makes such a difference.
Yeah. And I think the one thing that I can say for people who have had mental health issues is that we're pretty good partners when we're well, because I don't know if there's any proof of this, but I want to say we're more empathic, or we're more understanding. We at least get it, and we're much less likely to judge you, or at least have any standing to judge you. Like, how dare we judge anybody else for their issues? Yeah. Right. I'm curious. This is kind of a 180, but I'm curious if you agree with the idea that like comedians are all a little bit off, or comedians all struggle with mental health, and that's a thing, because that's something that is in a through line in so many comedians' lives and so many of their acts. Do you feel like that's true, and do you feel like that inhibited facing your own state of mind ever? There's something in art and especially in art criticism where things are given more weight because they're bleak or nihilistic or pessimistic. Yeah, and that's such a thing. Yeah, that can't talk about the whole Seattle grunge movement. Yeah. Yes. But that can't be the case all the time for everything. There needs to be a balance. Yeah. It's radical to be hopeful now. It's radical to be optimistic. And I think that it's an easier story to tell that we're all doomed and we'll never get out of this. But I think it's, one, we can't predict the future, and two, on the way to the future, I find myself feeling a little bit more energy when I think I'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. We've overcome a lot of bad things, and I just know that there are people who hear somebody interviewed about depression and they think, but that's you. And I used to say that the same thing. And the one thing I will say is that I was hopeless too. And I really didn't think there was anything that was going to save me. And I didn't think that I would do comedy again. And I was spending a lot of time thinking really scary thoughts. And I don't think it's brave what I did on the depression, because I was so thrilled to be alive and thriving that I wanted to share it with anybody. And what I really look to is to say how brave the people are who are struggling with it, who are getting out of bed every day and are fighting. I hope they know that they deserve a medal for that, because it's really hard. Just getting out of bed is a real victory some days. And I used to say, just get out of bed for a half hour. If you want to go back to bed, go back to bed. But believe me, that half hour makes a difference, and sometimes a donut.
Well, on that perfect note, thank you so much for being here, Gary.
Oh, it was a pleasure. We'll have to do it again in person maybe or something next year,
For sure.
because it's delightful talking to you, and I feel that you may be an antidepressant yourself.
Thank you so much. If you like this episode, please subscribe in Apple Podcasts or Spotify and leave us a review.